You're watching Forsaken Joe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy the story. Let's begin.
I was halfway through my pitch when the door slammed open. The sharp sound of it echoing in the high-ceilinged room sent a ripple of tension through the air. My investors, mid-discussion, turned to look, all of them visibly startled. And then he walked in, my ex-wife's new husband, looking like he'd just stepped off the set of a bad gangster movie, complete with that too-bright suit and a face that screamed trouble. Behind him, Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a smirk plastered across her face like she was watching a circus act unfold. I kept my cool, but the edge of my voice sharpened just enough to cut through the growing murmur in the room. "This is a private meeting, Jerry," I said, locking eyes with him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He stood tall, puffing up like a rooster. "I'm here to collect what's mine," he said, his voice thick with entitlement. "Clara's got a right to her share. You can't keep this all to yourself." The room went dead silent. My investors, once intrigued, now seemed almost amused. They weren't used to seeing this kind of drama at a corporate pitch, but I was too seasoned to let it faze me. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me, and gave Jerry a look that could freeze fire. "Not a penny," I said, each word deliberate, letting it hang in the air for a moment. "You don't get anything. You're not even on the paperwork." The tension cracked, and a few investors chuckled nervously. Jerry's face turned crimson, but Clara, her arms still folded, only smiled wider. I stood up, signaling to the room that the show was over. "I'll deal with this," I said, dismissing Jerry with a slight wave. The investors murmured in confusion, some shaking their heads, others laughing. I could feel the drama seeping out of the room, like air leaving a punctured balloon. The meeting was over before it had really begun. I wasn't about to let this nonsense ruin the day, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. The morning light was creeping in through the curtains, the soft orange glow mixing with the cool air of my country ranch home. The silence was heavy, but familiar, just the way I liked it. I was nursing a hot coffee, sitting at the kitchen table, the sound of birds outside filling the empty spaces around me. It was supposed to be another quiet morning, like every other. But I should have known better. The phone rang, breaking the stillness. I glanced at the screen, already irritated by the unfamiliar number. When I answered, the smug voice on the other end made my stomach drop. "Hey, it's me again," Jerry said, like he was calling to ask about the weather. "Just wanted to let you know. I burned down your shop last night." I froze, my hand still wrapped around the mug. A slow burn started in the back of my neck, then spread to my chest, flooding my veins with a hot, dangerous pulse. "What?" I could barely get the word out. "You heard me," he went on, that stupid, confident smirk coming through loud and clear in his voice. "The place is gone. All your inventory, everything you've built, gone up in smoke. Just like that." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "You're lying," I snapped, though something deep in my gut told me this wasn't a joke. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I did," Jerry said, with that same twisted satisfaction. "You'll get the news soon enough. I just thought you might want to hear it from me first." I couldn't think straight. I dropped my coffee mug, the ceramic shattering on the floor, and I didn't even register the sound. My breath was coming fast, shallow. The phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Without a second thought, I hung up. The house suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't stay there. I needed to move, to do something. My hands were already shaking as I grabbed my keys, the panic setting in as I raced out of the house. My truck roared to life as I peeled out of the driveway, tires squealing against the gravel. My mind was spinning 1,000 miles a minute, trying to catch up with the nightmare Jerry had just dropped on me. I had to get to the shop. My shop. Heart pounding in my chest, I sped down the winding country roads, each minute stretching longer than the last. The closer I got to the city, the more frantic my thoughts became. Was it really true? Was everything I'd worked for gone in an instant? What did Jerry think he could gain by doing this? By the time I reached the street where my flagship garage sat, I was practically vibrating with rage and fear. I turned the corner and slammed on the brakes, the sight of the place nearly knocking the wind out of me. Fire trucks were parked outside, red and flashing. Smoke was pouring out of the building, thick and black, curling up into the gray sky like a living thing. The entire structure was engulfed, flames licking at the roof, the heat radiating even from where I stood. I could hear the crackling from here, a sickening sound that twisted in my gut. My brain was struggling to make sense of it. This can't be real. I was out of the truck before it even stopped moving, my feet hitting the pavement in a blur. The heat from the fire stung my skin, and the acrid scent of burning wood and rubber hit me in a wave. It burned my nostrils, making my head spin. I ran toward the front of the building, my eyes frantically searching for any sign of what was left. The firefighters were everywhere, shouting orders, spraying down the building with hoses, but it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. This was no accident. This was personal. And then, just as I was about to shout out, something inside me cracked. I don't even know why I did it, but I started laughing. It was the wrong building. The flagship garage, my real hub of operations, was still a few blocks away. This was an old, rundown location we hadn't used in years, a decoy from when I'd first started out. A place I'd kept under my name, but had left to rot, hoping one day I could let it fade quietly into history. I laughed again, louder this time, the sound raw and jagged, like I'd been holding it in for too long. This was Jerry's big plan. This was his victory. The idiot had burned down the wrong building. My building. I stood there for a moment, staring at the smoke billowing from what was once a shell of a garage. Part of me should have been furious. Hell, most of me was. But I couldn't shake the ridiculousness of it all. Jerry had just given me the perfect out. The fire crews were still working, oblivious to the real story behind this mess. I turned on my heel, heading back to the truck. I couldn't waste any more time here. My real shop was safe, but I had a feeling things were about to get a lot worse before they got better. And this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. Not when Jerry had just made one hell of a mistake. I slammed the truck door shut and tossed the keys in the cup holder. The fire trucks were still parked out front, their red lights flickering through the smoke, but I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. That building had been a dead weight for years, nothing more than an old shell I'd kept on the books as a legacy, a reminder of where I started. I was already on the phone with my operations manager before I even hit the gas. "Where's everyone? Is the warehouse running?" I didn't wait for him to finish the sentence. "Tell the team to stay on their toes. I'll be there in 20. My hands were already steady as I navigated through the traffic, but my head was still swimming. Jerry, idiot that he was, had torched the wrong location. I should have been angrier, maybe, but I wasn't. In fact, I kind of felt grateful. I couldn't stop the small smirk creeping across my face as I sped through the streets. My dad's voice echoed in the back of my mind like he was sitting shotgun, the old familiar advice slipping through the cracks of my frustration. Always keep your real base hidden. I'd listened to him back then when I was just starting out, too young to know better, but smart enough to know that if you wanted to build something that lasted, you couldn't afford to have all your eggs in one basket. That decoy location? It was supposed to be a quiet ghost in the machine, a placeholder for when things had grown. I'd kept it in my name, made sure the utilities were active enough to avoid any suspicion, but everyone who mattered knew the real business was elsewhere. I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes had already passed, and I pressed the pedal down harder, adrenaline fighting the rising wave of disbelief. This can't be happening. I was used to challenges, but this felt like a sick joke. Jerry was still out there somewhere, puffed up with a sense of victory that was so misplaced, it might as well have been laughable. By the time I hit the side streets near the warehouse, the first wave of relief hit. I could already see the secure, nondescript exterior of the building in the distance. No flashing signs, no grandiose logo to draw attention. Just steel and concrete, tucked away on a quiet industrial block. It was exactly what I wanted. Exactly what my dad had insisted I keep as my core. I parked the truck on the side, out of sight, and walked toward the back door, slipping inside before anyone had a chance to notice me. The low hum of machinery, the sound of hands on tools, greeted me. Employees were milling around, sorting inventory, tweaking engines, getting work done like it was any other day. Nothing had changed. I stood in the corner for a minute, letting the routine wash over me. The air smelled of oil, metal, and gasoline, a scent that was as familiar to me as the air I breathed. The buzz of conversations, the rhythm of tools tapping against metal, the whir of the polishing machines. It was the life of the business, the real heart of it. No one here had any idea that half a mile away, the building they thought was my flagship was burning to the ground. It was almost peaceful. My manager, Steve, finally noticed me standing there and came over, his face tense as he wiped grease off his hands. Hey, boss. Everything okay? Yes, Steve. Just had to take care of some business, I said, trying to sound casual, though I knew my voice didn't quite mask the edge beneath it. How's everything going here? Running smooth. We're actually ahead of schedule on a few of the bigger restorations, he replied, still looking me over, probably wondering why I hadn't called earlier. But I was good at hiding what wasn't supposed to be seen. You hear about the fire? We got some calls coming in. I nodded, pushing past him toward the office. I'm aware. Just keep things moving here. I'll deal with the fallout. I paused, my fingers brushing over the surface of the desk in front of me. My dad's old papers, contracts, and blueprints were stacked in the corner, just as they had been for years. Every time I came in here, I saw his handwriting, his notes scribbled in margins, his careful planning. It was like he was still watching, still guiding. I sat down and flicked through some of the paperwork. Nothing urgent, just routine stuff. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt a twisted sense of relief that Jerry had done me a favor, however badly. That building had been a pain in my ass for too long, and if it had to burn down for people to stop asking questions about it, so be it. For the first time in a while, I could almost hear my dad laughing behind me, telling me not to sweat the small stuff, that the bigger game was always a few steps ahead. The decoy had worked perfectly. I could feel the tension in my chest ease a little. The business was still safe. Hell, I was ahead now. And Jerry? He had just lit the match on something that would only make my position stronger. The idiotic bastard didn't even realize what he'd just handed me. For once, the chaos felt like it might actually be in my favor. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was sitting in the back booth of a rundown roadhouse bar. The air inside was thick with smoke, old whiskey, and something that might have been spilled beer. It was a hole-in-the-wall kind of place, the kind where nobody cared who you were, and where I could sit and think without anyone bothering me. My lawyer, Janet, slid into the booth across from me. Her eyes were sharp, and her posture stiff, the way she always looked when she was focused on something. I could see the exhaustion on her face, the tightness around her jaw that came from dealing with people like Jerry, and I knew she'd be just as ready to burn him down as I was. I handed her my phone. Listen to this. She raised an eyebrow as she pressed play, and I watched her expression shift. It didn't take long. Jerry's voice crackled through the speaker, his smugness oozing with every word. Hey, it's me again. Just wanted to let you know. I burned down your shop last night. The place is gone. All your inventory, everything you've built, gone up in smoke. Just like that. Thought you might want to hear it from me first. Janet's eyes widened when the voicemail ended. She didn't say a word for a few seconds. She didn't need to. Her stunned silence said everything. I swear to God, she muttered, shaking her head. How fucking dumb can they be? I took a long sip of my beer, letting the sting of the cold liquid settle in my chest. Apparently, pretty damn dumb. You got the financials, the security footage, the whole deal. Now I just need to know what we're going to do about it. Janet pulled a tablet out of her bag and flicked through a few files before pushing the screen in front of me. The footage of Jerry's smug face was front and center, talking about his victory. Then came the payments he'd funneled through shell companies, obviously attempting to cover his tracks, but it was all too neat. Too perfect. Look at this, she said, tapping the screen. I've got the bank transfers, the wire fraud stuff, and it's all traced back to him. And this. She swiped to another document, showing a series of emails between Clara and Jerry, each one dripping with scheming. They've been planning this for months. I sat back in the booth, the weight of it all settling in. Jerry had thought he was some kind of mastermind, but all he'd done was hand us a stack of evidence so thick, I couldn't see how he'd possibly talk his way out of it. Janet leaned forward, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table, her lawyer's mind already running through the motions. This is textbook arson, attempted fraud, breaking and entering. Not to mention the blackmail stuff we can dig up later. She paused and met my eyes, her voice lowering. You have everything you need to bury him. The clink of a glass being set down on the table caught my attention, but I didn't look up. Instead, I turned my focus back to Janet. What happens next? She took a deep breath, considering it for a moment. You have options. You can go to the cops with all this, press charges, and they'll take care of it. You get your justice, your victory. But if you want something more, something that really makes him pay, there's another way. I felt my pulse quicken, the words hanging in the air between us. What do you mean, more? She studied me for a second, like she was weighing something heavy. You've got the power to ruin him, Owen. Financially, professionally, personally. If you really want to hit them where it hurts, you can make sure they never get a foothold again. The things you could pull. It wouldn't just end with Jerry losing his business or his reputation. We're talking about total annihilation. I didn't answer immediately. My mind was running through the possibilities, the images of Jerry and Clara's faces when everything they'd worked so hard for came crashing down. They wanted to screw me over? Fine. But what did I really want out of all this? Janet's eyes narrowed slightly, like she could see the wheels turning. So what's it gonna be? Justice? Or revenge? I exhaled slowly, the weight of the question settling in. Justice was easy. It was neat. It was the law. But revenge was something else entirely. It was raw, personal. It was the kind of thing that hit harder, that left a mark. I leaned forward, staring down at the table. I want them to feel it. All of it. Janet's lips curled into a smile, the kind of smile that meant she was already 10 steps ahead of me. I thought you might say that. We spent the next hour laying out the details. We had a strong case, but now it wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure Jerry and Clara never saw it coming. The trap was already set. All we had to do now was pull the trigger. The next morning, I barely had a chance to breathe before the doorbell rang. It was too early for visitors, especially the kind that didn't know how to stay out of my business. When I opened the door, I nearly slammed it shut again. There stood my younger brother, Ryan. We hadn't spoken much in years, not since that stupid falling out we had after Dad's death. He'd drifted off, gone his own way, and I'd kept my distance. But there he was now, standing in front of me, wearing that same damn expression, like he knew something I didn't. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to make sense of it. He broke the silence first. You think I'm in on it, don't you? His voice was tight, his eyes narrowed, like he was already bracing for an argument. I frowned, still processing what he was saying. In on what? The sabotage. The fire. Jerry and Clara. You think I'm helping them, right? He looked almost defensive, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I shook my head, not sure if I should be pissed or confused. What the hell are you talking about? I've been watching them, Ryan blurted out, his voice low but firm. For months. Following them, gathering information. They've been playing you, Owen. All of them. You never saw it coming. I stepped back, letting him in, the tension in the air making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I hadn't expected this. At all. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small USB drive and sliding it across the kitchen table like it was a piece of evidence in some crime scene. This is everything, he said, his voice quieter now, like he wasn't sure how much I was willing to take in. What they've been planning. How they've been setting you up. I grabbed the USB and plugged it into my laptop, my hands still shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what was happening. The screen flickered to life, and the first thing that popped up was a series of surveillance photos. Clara and Jerry, together, always together, meeting in shady places, exchanging documents, plotting their next move. I scrolled through the files, feeling the anger build in my chest. Ryan had been following them for months. He had captured their every move, recorded their every conversation. It was like he had been living in their shadow, waiting for the right moment to hand me the smoking gun. Why didn't you tell me about this earlier? I asked, my voice sharp, confused. Ryan's face twisted, and I saw a flicker of guilt. I didn't trust you, he admitted, barely above a whisper. You pushed me away after Dad died. You were always so focused on the business, so cold. I figured you'd just brush me off. So I did it myself. I had to get proof. I had to make sure you saw it for yourself. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to make sense of it all. So you've been spying on them for how long? And now you just show up with this? I'm not just showing up for kicks, Owen. I did this because I want to make things right. I want to help. I can't undo what's already been done, but I can make sure they don't get away with it. You've been playing their game, but I've been playing mine. He took a deep breath, like he was bracing for impact. I've been feeding Clara just enough misinformation to keep her thinking she's winning. I paused, staring at the files on the screen. It was all coming together. Ryan wasn't some bystander in all of this. He was part of the game, too. And for once, I wasn't the only one who had been working in the shadows. I looked up at him, my frustration starting to fade. So, you've been feeding her lies. Yeah, I made sure she thought I was on her side, that I was helping them take you down. But all I was doing was keeping her distracted. feeding her just enough to keep her looking in the wrong direction. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the USB and the proof of his loyalty, proof I hadn't expected. He was my brother, and I had no idea he was still willing to play this game, even if it meant keeping secrets from me. But now it made sense. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure whether to trust him or strangle him. But one thing was clear: Ryan was on my side, at least now. And for once, I was starting to believe it. I didn't know what I expected when I followed Janet and Ryan into my father's old study. Maybe just a bunch of dusty boxes filled with papers I hadn't thought about in years. But as soon as I sat down at Dad's old oak desk, the weight of it all hit me. This wasn't just about Jerry and Clara. This was about everything Dad had set up before he died. Ryan hovered by the door, arms crossed, glancing around the room like it was haunted. I knew he hadn't been here in ages. It wasn't his space, not the way it had always been mine. Dad's handwriting on the edges of papers, his old business journals stacked high. But I wasn't here for memories. I was here for answers. Janet pulled out a folder and flipped through it, her brow furrowed as she scanned page after page. I could feel the tension between us, a silent understanding that this was it. The moment we either found something that changed everything or walked away empty-handed. "I'm not seeing anything useful so far," she muttered, tossing one page aside. But then her fingers stopped on a document, and she leaned in closer. "Wait a minute." She slid the paper across the desk toward me, her eyes wide. I glanced at it and froze. It was a clause in my dad's will, buried deep in the legal language, but clear as day once you knew where to look. "Here it is," Janet said, tapping the page. "This clause voids any claims or financial interests from people who are involved in any form of intentional sabotage," meaning Clara and Jerry's little fire stunt. I read it again, the words making my stomach twist with disbelief. "Dad set this up?" I muttered. Ryan, who had been quiet up until then, looked over my shoulder. "He knew they'd come after you, didn't he?" His voice sounded strange, like he was still processing what he was reading. It was all clicking into place now. Dad had always been paranoid about people taking advantage, always planning for the worst. I'd thought he was just a bit obsessive, but looking at this, I realized he had known exactly who Clara was the moment I'd proposed to her. "Check this out," Janet said, her voice almost giddy now. "There's more." She pulled out another file, this one marked with a faded red stamp that read confidential. Inside was a private investigator's report. I flipped through it quickly, and then I stopped. My heart thudded. He had Clara profiled. Years ago. I barely recognized my own voice as I said the words. Janet nodded slowly, reading along with me. "Your dad wasn't blind, Owen. He knew she wasn't the right fit for you. Hell, he probably knew she'd try to screw you over the minute you weren't looking." The report laid out every detail: Clara's past relationships, her financial history, even a note about her volatile personality, her knack for manipulation. And then, tucked in the middle of all that, was a line that made everything else pale in comparison. "Your dad had her pegged as a risk the second she came into your life," Janet said, shaking her head. "He wasn't just thinking about the business. He was thinking about you." I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all sinking in. Jesus, he knew. Ryan's voice broke through the silence. "So the decoy garage, that was Dad's idea too, wasn't it?" I turned to him, the pieces finally falling into place. It had to be. He set it up as a safety net, a buffer for if anything went south. He was ahead of the game before anyone even knew there was a game to play. Janet smirked, glancing between us. "You're sitting on a legal goldmine. Your dad not only saw all of this coming, he prepared for it. Every single step." I looked at the files in front of me, the will, the investigator's report, and everything else. It was like Dad had been playing a chess game with the universe, 5 moves ahead of everyone else. And here I was, just starting to catch up. "Unbelievable," I whispered. "I've spent all this time thinking I was making the right moves, but he'd already planned everything. Every move, every counter." Janet grinned, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. "You've got them exactly where you need them. Clara and Jerry, they're finished. All you have to do is make sure they don't get away with it." I looked down at the papers again, the weight of Dad's foresight heavy on my chest. Everything he'd set up, every piece of the puzzle he'd already laid out, was all right here. And it felt like a damn miracle. Not just because of what I could do with it, but because for once, I didn't have to do this alone. The next move was mine. and with Dad's hand still guiding me, I was ready to make it. The day of the shareholder meeting was nothing like I'd expected. The boardroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation, and the smell of coffee and expensive suits filled the room. Investors shuffled in, reporters with their cameras and notepads already snapping photos, eager for a story. I could feel the weight of it, the kind of pressure that presses down on your chest when you know your entire life is about to be thrown in front of a crowd. Clara and Jerry were already sitting in the front row. Jerry had that same stupid cocky look on his face, and Clara, well, she looked like she was on the edge of a victory lap, her sharp smile showing way more confidence than was warranted. They'd come in looking like they were ready to take over the world, dressed to the nines in their matching power suits. They looked like a corporate version of a reality show villain duo. I took a deep breath, scanning the room. My lawyer, Janet, stood beside me, her gaze never leaving Clara and Jerry. She knew what was about to happen, and she was ready to let the world see it all. Jerry stood first, clearing his throat like he was about to make some grand announcement. We're here today because we've been watching Owen mismanage this company for far too long, he said, his voice booming across the room. It's time for new leadership. Time for a fresh direction. Clara and I are prepared to take control and ensure the future of this company. His words hung in the air, and I could feel the investors tensing, murmurs spreading through the crowd. He was playing his hand, hoping people would buy into his self-righteous tone. Clara's gaze slid to me, her lips curling into that smug smile. She was ready to sink her claws in, no doubt. I stayed calm, leaning back in my chair, hands folded in front of me, but inside, everything was boiling. Janet had the remote for the projector and hit the button just as Jerry was finishing his little speech. The room darkened, and suddenly his voice echoed across the speakers. The audio from the voicemail Jerry had left me played loud and clear. Hey, it's me again. Just wanted to let you know. I burned down your shop last night. The place is gone. All your inventory, everything you've built, gone up in smoke. Just like that. The room went dead silent. Every single eye in the place turned from Jerry to me. You could hear the collective intake of breath. I saw the sweat start to bead on Jerry's forehead, and Clara's face shifted from confident to pale in the blink of an eye. Janet stood up, her voice cutting through the tension. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you've just heard what happens when someone tries to sabotage this company. But that's not all. She clicked through slides on the projector, and surveillance photos of Clara and Jerry started flashing on the screen. Images of them meeting in secret, shaking hands with shady figures, all while plotting what they thought would be a smooth takeover. The gasps from the crowd were almost audible. Janet didn't stop. Here we have financial records that link Clara and Jerry directly to these efforts. Wire transfers, payments funneled through shell companies. They've been operating in the shadows, trying to pull strings without anyone noticing. Another click, and the room was hit with a set of documents. Signed contracts between Clara and Jerry, their names clearly printed across the top. Documents that were designed to wrest control from me. Now, if we want to talk about mismanagement, Janet continued, her tone colder now. Let's talk about their plan to wipe out all your investments and take over. What do you call that? Fraud? Breach of trust? I think it's safe to say they've been manipulating you all into believing they had the company's best interests at heart. She was relentless. Every slide, every word, was a dagger aimed at them. And they were being skewered in front of an audience that had once trusted them. Jerry's face turned red as a tomato, and Clara's lip twitched. She was trying so damn hard to keep up the act, but the cracks were there, wide open. The room was turning. The investors who'd been on the fence, they were all shifting in their seats, leaning in, whispering to each other. There were a few looks of disgust, some even glancing toward Jerry and Clara as if they'd just realized they'd been duped. Janet didn't let up. Let's talk about the legal implications, she said, pulling up another set of documents. You see, based on Owen's father's will, any claims or ownership interests from people involved in intentional sabotage are automatically void. The very clause that protects this company from people like, she shot a glance at Clara and Jerry, like them. Clara's eyes widened, and for a second, she looked like she was about to speak, but nothing came out. Jerry stood up, his face pale now, sweat dripping down his neck as he sputtered. This is all lies. I leaned forward, cutting him off before he could spew more nonsense. You can lie all you want, Jerry. The facts speak for themselves. The room was completely silent now. It was over. The investors were no longer just murmuring. They were questioning everything. Some were already reaching for their phones, no doubt about to call their lawyers, while others watched with a mix of disbelief and fury. It was like they were finally waking up to the reality that they'd been played by two people who thought they could slide under the radar. Clara's eyes darted between me, the investors, and the door, but there was no escape now. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the air, "I think we can all agree it's time for a change in leadership. But the change starts here, with transparency, with trust, and with the truth." There was no applause, but there didn't need to be. The room had already made its decision. Clara and Jerry were done, and as the last whispers of disbelief filled the room, I knew they wouldn't walk out of this unscathed. Not by a long shot. The fallout came fast. By that night, Adrian had been arrested. His mugshot, looking like he'd just realized his life had unraveled, was splashed across every news outlet. The irony of it, his smugness in front of cameras before, now reduced to that helpless stare in his mugshot, was almost too much to take in. Within hours, his face became a viral punchline. Every joke, every meme about him made its rounds. His so-called power trip was over. Clara's fall was just as swift, if not swifter. The people she used to flaunt her connections with, investors, socialites, business figures, dropped her like a bad habit. It was like a chain reaction. The women who once whispered sweet nothings in her ear were now silent. People she'd carefully manipulated into her orbit didn't want to touch her. She went from queen of the scene to the pariah of the city in a matter of days. And yet, as much as I felt a sense of victory, a part of me couldn't help but feel empty. Watching someone you thought you knew crumble doesn't come with the satisfaction you think it will. I stood in the greenhouse that evening, surrounded by the plants Dad had cared for, trying to make sense of it all. The air smelled of damp soil and growth, the hum of life all around me in the thick of evening. There was a calmness to it, even as everything around me felt like it was on fire. Ryan stepped in, breaking my thoughts. He didn't say anything right away, just stood next to me, looking out the same windows Dad used to stand at. We stood there for a while, listening to the soft rustling of the leaves, feeling the weight of the quiet. Finally, Ryan spoke. "I'm tired of competing, man," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Tired of feeling like I'm fighting for a seat at the table. I just want to build something that matters. Something real." I looked at him, his face softer now, without the hard edge he'd carried for so many years. It wasn't the words I expected, but somehow it felt right. I nodded slowly, watching the light fade outside. Dad would have said we're both just trying to outdo each other, trying to prove something. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. He was always about legacy, not who had the better idea or who made more money. He wanted us to build something solid, not tear each other apart. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had in days. "You're right. He always knew what was important. And he was right about us, too." We both stood there, the sound of crickets in the distance now filling the space between us. It felt like the first time we'd really talked like brothers in a long time. Not over business, not over Dad's stuff, but just talking. I wasn't sure where things were going with us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe we were finally on the same page. "I think," Ryan said, eyes focused on the plants around us, "we should make sure this place lives up to what Dad wanted. Not just for us, but for the people who worked here. The people who cared." I nodded again. "That's the plan. And this time, we're doing it together." The silence settled over us again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, the kind that only came when you finally figured out what really mattered. And as I stood there in Dad's greenhouse, surrounded by the plants he'd nurtured and the legacy he'd built, I knew that the real work was just beginning. But this time, we weren't just trying to keep something alive. We were ready to build it stronger than ever. 6 months had passed, and it felt like the dust had finally settled, at least on the outside. The business was booming, better than it had been in years. The flagship garage, the one Jerry and Clara thought they could steal from me, was thriving. Our reputation was stronger than ever, built on the fact that we'd not only survived a sabotage attempt, but turned it into a story of strength. Customers, investors, and partners all saw that we were resilient, and they respected that. I'd taken the funds that Clara would have claimed and launched a foundation, something that went beyond just turning a profit. It wasn't just about the cars anymore. It was about giving something back. The foundation now trained young mechanics, helped them get their certifications, and provided scholarships to kids in trade school who wanted to build something with their hands. Ryan was running the program. I wasn't sure he'd ever find his place here, but he was thriving. The guy who used to sit in the corner, scribbling in notebooks and second-guessing everything, had become a leader. He had a purpose now. He didn't just want to work for a paycheck. He wanted to change things. The pride in his voice when he called to tell me about a new partnership with a local high school, you could hear it. He was finally doing something that mattered to him. And then there was Janet, my lawyer, my advisor, and at this point, someone I trusted more than most. She'd become more than just a legal consultant. She was a part of the team. We still laughed about that phone call from Jerry. "I burned down your shop," he'd said so proudly. And now every time Janet brought it up, we'd both get a kick out of how stupid he'd been. But it wasn't just that. She was the one who kept everything running smooth behind the scenes. Contracts, negotiations, keeping the media off our backs. "Remember that time he thought he had you cornered?" Janet asked one afternoon as we sat in my office, looking over some of the latest business proposals. What a joke. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. Yeah, I'll never forget it. That's the kind of thing that'll be in business ethics textbooks for years to come. She laughed, shaking her head. It's the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? It felt good to joke about it now. The whole mess with Clara and Adrian was behind us, but it was a reminder of how quickly things could go south, and how easy it was to get distracted by power and greed. Clara and Adrian had become cautionary tales. They were the people everyone pointed to when they talked about what could go wrong in business. People whispered their names, not with admiration, but with warning. They were like ghosts in the machine. Their attempts to take what wasn't theirs now part of every conversation about integrity and ethics. But here we were, stronger, better. We'd turned their mistakes into something real. I'd built a legacy of my own, one that had nothing to do with them. It was about the work we did, the lives we impacted, and the future we were creating. I looked over at the pictures on the wall, photos of the shop, the foundation's work, kids with grease on their hands and smiles on their faces. That was the future. That was what mattered. Ryan walked into the office, his face lighter than I'd ever seen it. "You know," he said, hands in his pockets. "I never thought I'd actually say it, but I'm proud of us. Of what we've done. It's not about the money anymore. It's about something bigger." I nodded, standing up and slapping him on the back. "Yeah, it's about the people we're helping, the work we're doing, and it's about the future we're building. Not for us, but for everyone else." Ryan smiled, his eyes finally matching the words he was saying. He wasn't just talking about business anymore. He was talking about purpose. And for once, I wasn't just building something to survive. I was building something that would last long after we were gone. I stood in the greenhouse, drink in hand, watching the orchids bloom. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, the soft, steady hum of life filling the space. The orchids, delicate, vibrant, seemed to reach toward the sunlight streaming in through the glass. My father's hands had once tended to them with patience, with care. Now, it was my turn, in some way, to carry on that legacy. It was a quiet moment, one I didn't need to fill with words. I had a habit of seeking out peace in these moments, letting the world go silent while I focused on something simple, something real. As the petals unfurled, I felt a kind of calm, the kind that only comes after a storm has passed. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the stillness. I pulled it out, swiping across the screen. A text from one of the kids we'd sponsored through the foundation. "Thank you for everything. I'm going to build something amazing." I stared at the words for a second, a smile creeping onto my face. It wasn't a huge thing, not a life-altering message. But to him, it was everything. To me, it was a reminder of why we'd started this whole thing, to give people a chance, to help them build what they wanted, what they deserved. Building something real, that was the hard part. Destruction? Destruction was easy. Anyone could tear something down. But building? That took heart. It took time, effort, and a willingness to keep going when the world made you feel like quitting. Adrian had thought he could burn me down. He'd thought he could destroy everything I'd worked for, rip it out from under me. But he didn't understand. You can't burn something you never owned. And you sure as hell can't torch someone who's already planned 10 steps ahead. I looked back at the orchids again, the soft glow of the fading light dancing across the petals. There was a beauty in growth and patience. Something I'd learned from Dad. You build quietly, steadily, and when the time comes, you stand tall, no matter who tries to bring you down. The flowers were blooming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was too.